I have great respect for each of you individually, but collectively, I'm worried you're going to fail the country.
Erskine Bowles, co-chair of the Debt Commission, sounding the alarm that the Congressional Supercommittee will fail to meet its November 23rd deadline to find $1.2 trillion in deficit cuts. Now, 100 members of Congress representing both parties calling for the Supercommittee to go big and cut the national debt by $4 trillion. Joining us, the congressman leading the group of 100, North Carolina Democrat Heath Shuler, and Idaho Republican Mike Simpson. And Congressman, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Let's start with the letter that your group, 60 Democrats, 40 Republicans, sent to the Supercommittee this week. And here is the key sentence. To succeed, all options for mandatory and discretionary spending and revenues must be on the table. Congressman Simpson, as the Republican, will you support more revenues, either from raising tax rates or cutting deductions, closing loopholes, as part of a plan to cut the deficit?
You have to. You can't. The reality is you cannot get to $4 trillion without including additional revenues. And we might have different ideas about what those revenues would look like. I think you could get additional revenues by actually lowering the tax rates and eliminating all of the exemptions underneath and that type of thing. And I think you'd have an economic boom in this country, and the revenue would come into the federal government. So more revenue is key to this.
But when you say it, you would take some of the money from closing the loopholes, as the Bowles-Simpson Commission did, and use that for deficit reduction. You wouldn't make it revenue neutral.
No, some of it would go to deficit reduction. It has to, if you're going to get to $4 trillion. And everybody agrees that you've got to get to $4 trillion to stabilize our debt and start decreasing the deficit.
All right. Before I bring in Congressman Shuler, 2 points. Grover Norquist, a name with which I'm sure you're familiar, the head of Americans for Tax Reform, has a pledge that you and all but 6 House Republicans have signed to oppose any net increase in taxes. Exactly the opposite of what you just said to me. And I also want to play what House Speaker John Boehner said this week. Take a look.
Our conference is opposed to tax hikes because we believe that tax hikes will hurt our economy and put Americans out of work.
Question. How many House Republicans do you think will follow you, are willing to break their pledge, and quite frankly put their political futures at risk to make this deal?
Well, first, the pledge. I signed that in 1998 when I first ran. I didn't know I was signing a marriage agreement that would last forever. And I think the majority of members of Congress understand that you have to have additional revenue. If you look at the percentage of the GDP that comes into the government right now, it's at about 14%, 14 to 15%. It's traditionally been 18% in that neighborhood. So the revenue coming into the government has decreased as a percentage of GDP, and the expenditures that used to be around 19% are now up around 25%. We've got to bring those closer together again. Okay,
and that brings me to Congressman Shuler. Will you support real cuts in entitlements, raising the eligibility age, slowing the growth of benefits as part of a deal to cut the deficit? And would you accept the deal that the Simpson-Bowles Commission, the Presidential Commission, offered, which was basically about 3-to-1 spending cuts to tax increases?
I think Bowles-Simpson report not only reflects the members of Congress feel about the program, but what the rest of the world is looking at America to say, are you going to make these significant cuts? And when it comes to entitlements, it has to be on the table. We cannot do this without entitlements. We can't do it without
you say it's
revenue.
On the table, but I must say, Mike Simpson went further. He said he would support it. Would you support it?
Absolutely. In order to save these programs, we have to make sure that they have long, more sustainable resources that they have, but also get rid of the fraud and abuse that's been in the programs for quite some time.
Do you think that President Obama going around the country blaming a do-nothing Congress and making it sound as if all you need to do is get millionaires and billionaires to pay more in taxes, do you think that's constructive in setting the stage for a compromise?
Well, far too often we've seen how politics has played such an important role in Washington, especially the closer we get to the presidential elections. The most important thing we can do is both Democrats and Republicans come together, as Mike and another 100 members, and adding every single day to that list, work together to make sure that our debt and deficit spending that we've been having over the last decade doesn't continue, then we have a more sustainable path for our future. And we put the next generation in a situation where they're not having to pay everything. Every dollar that we borrow is a tax on the next generation.
So to answer my question directly, do you think what the president is doing these days is constructive or not?
Well, I think it would be much more helpful if the focus was on what he can do and the support that he can give the super committee. The problem that you have is the politics. If he supports the super committee or he supports one way, that pushes some of my colleagues on the other side in the opposite direction. So I think in one sense, if he's on the sidelines and allow that the members of Congress, the ranking file members, to continue to grow in our numbers and support the super committee to do something big, $4 trillion plus. I mean, Mike and I would probably like to have more closer to the $5 or $6 trillion mark and put everything on the table.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because you both have mentioned it. The super committee's charge is to come up with $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction by the day before Thanksgiving. But both of you have talked repeatedly about $4 trillion. Why isn't $1.2 trillion enough?
Because that does not stabilize the debt and does not start paying down our deficit. It is kicking the can down the road, and frankly, we're out of road. We have to make some very difficult decisions, and no matter what the super committee comes up with, it is going to be a difficult vote for every member of Congress, because there's going to be part of it that they don't like. But the reality is that if I'm going to make a difficult vote that I'm willing to make, I want it to mean something. I don't want it to be just kicking the can down the road.
You know, Congressman Shuler, for all of this talk about, well, that your group is growing and there's this... The fact is, I think the prevailing sense, the conventional wisdom here in Washington right now, is that the super committee is deadlocked. That in fact, the greatest chances are that they're not going to come up with any deal before November 23rd. Before we get to whether that's real or not, what do you think the impact will be if the super committee comes up empty on the economy, on the markets, on the credit rating for this country?
It would be absolutely devastating to our country. That not only would it look as if the Congress is more dysfunctional than it already is, but the whole world is watching that we're going to be able to come up with something that is big. And having the support of 100 members and the 45 members in the Senate, so not only we have a bipartisan, but this is in a bicameral way, that we can support those 12 members and say, we have your back. We know you have to make these difficult decisions and choices that's going to impact us not only here in the U.S., but truly what's happening all over the world. We need to continue to be the leaders of this world, and the way we do that is those 12 members need more than just our 100 members in the House. We need to increase that number every single day. We need more members of Congress to join us.
I'm going to pick up on that in a second, but your thoughts, Congressman Simpson, about the impact if the super committee doesn't meet that November 23rd deadline?
As he said, the whole world is watching this, and I actually think the markets start to tank if this super committee does not come up with something, because I think they're looking. The markets will either correct this situation or we will. And I think the economy will suffer greatly, and the American people will suffer greatly. And who's going to suffer the most whenever the economy goes down? It's those that are less well off. So we have to do something. And the tough thing is, and I know this sounds ridiculous and everything else, but we've got to put aside our elections. We've got to put aside the Republican and Democrat. We've got to put aside politics. And we've got to do what's right for the country. And this is one time where I think it's critical. We've got one chance to fix this, and this is that chance.
Now, I guess what I don't understand, and it is impressive, and that's why we're having you on the program, 100 members signing this, and as I say, with 60 Democrats, 40 Republicans, is a big deal. But there doesn't seem to be a sense. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. Do you really sense that there is a growing move? Because the general opinion, I think, the conventional wisdom is this isn't going to get done. That the committee, they may get to the $1.2 trillion, but that they're not going to make a bargain. That the Republicans are not going to give up on taxes. The Democrats aren't going to give up on serious entitlement reform.
We didn't want to put pressure on the committee to do something. What we want to do is show them that there's support out there to do something big. And getting 100 members of Congress to sign anything is almost impossible. So when you have 100, now we have 103, and more members are looking at it, I think you'll see that number grow. And I think overwhelmingly, as I talk to people, even people that didn't sign this letter, know that this is the right thing to do. They were just a little nervous about signing it.
Do you think that, and because Republicans have been pretty strong about opposing the revenue, do you think, well, how many Republicans do you think would go along
I couldn't give you a number, but I believe that there is a majority in Congress of Republicans and Democrats on a bipartisan basis. And that's the most important thing. If you look at any time this country has had a problem, the solution has come, it's been a bipartisan solution. If it was a Republican only sort of proposal, it wouldn't work and it wouldn't go anywhere. If it was a Democrat only proposal, it wouldn't go anywhere. It has to be bipartisan.
Last thing, and you said you didn't want to put pressure on the super committee, but Congressman Shuler, they are the guys making and women deciding this issue, and they have 2.5 weeks. I think at this point the 12 members of the super committee are seen largely as agents of the congressional leadership, the leaders who appointed them. Should the members break with the leaders, act as independent agents, make the grand bargain, and let the political chips fall where they may?
Well, certainly I agree that Mike and I would have been really good options to have on the super committee. I think we could have probably...
There may be a reason why
there's a
the
reason for that, Chris. But the reality is you now have over 100 in the House, statesmen and women, and in the Senate who are acting in a way that gives them that support. And that is the reason for the letter, is to say we have your back, we know it's tough, and gives them the opportunity to break from that leadership role that was appointed. They were appointed by our leadership, and that's not a reflection of the U.S. and it's not a reflection of what's true in our Congress. We have to see more of the middle of the road. The Tuesday group, the Blue Dog members continue to step forward because we represent 80% of America.
And to give you the last word, Congressman Simpson, should the super committee members, should they break with the leader? Should they act independently and take this into their own hands?
They need to do what's in the best interest of the country. But if you will look at the recent comments of Speaker Boehner, he has suggested that revenue can be on the table, that it's going to be part of the solution. I think
but then you just heard him say here, tax hikes, no.
Difference between
There's a difference
tax increases and revenues.
Yeah. Nobody's in favor of increasing tax rates.
Right.
But we are in favor of increasing revenue. We have to increase revenues. So I think Speaker Boehner wants a big deal. He tried to negotiate one with the president earlier on the debt ceiling limit. That didn't come about. But I know in speaking with him that he wants to solve this problem.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both so much. We'll stay on top of this story.
Thank you.
Up next, Herman Cain is accused of sexual harassment, but he stays on top of the polls and increases his fundraising. We'll ask our Sunday group what's going on when we come right back.